I didn't slam the garage door in anger. I closed it slowly, listened to the lock click, and left her car sitting there for 14 days without touching it. The smell of hot rubber hit me before I even stepped fully inside. That sharp, burnt scent that lingers when an engine's just been killed, and it didn't belong in my space. My garage has always been quiet, controlled, the kind of place where every tool has a shadow on the wall and every sound means something. That day, the silence felt wrong. There was a white Lexus SUV parked dead center on my concrete floor, perfectly aligned like it had been measured in, and for a second I just stood there, keys still in my hand, trying to process how someone else's car ended up inside my locked garage. Then I heard the soft click of heels behind me, followed by that overly sweet perfume that always hit a second too late, like a warning you didn't ask for. "Oh good, you're home," she said, like we were sharing a kitchen instead of standing in my property. Linda Whitmore, HOA president, clipboard queen of the cul-de-sac, standing there like she belonged. I didn't raise my voice, didn't step closer. I just looked at the car, then at her, then back at the car again, letting the silence stretch until it got uncomfortable. "You parked in my garage," I said, flat, just stating a fact. She gave me that practiced smile, the kind that looks friendly until you notice it never reaches the eyes. "Well, technically, it's visible from the street, so it affects community appearance," she said, like that explained anything, like that gave her permission. The air felt tight, like before a storm, but I didn't argue. That's the thing about people like Linda. They expect noise, pushback, something they can push against. I just nodded once, slow, like I was considering her logic, even though it didn't hold a drop of water. The hum of the garage door motor was still echoing faintly from when I came in, a low mechanical whisper overhead, and I glanced up at it without thinking. She followed my eyes, just for a second, then looked back at me, confident, certain she'd already won whatever this was. "I'll move it later," she added, already turning like the conversation was over, like my space was just another checkbox on her list. I could feel the weight of the remote in my hand, the smooth plastic edges worn down from years of use. Something simple, something I understood completely. I didn't stop her, didn't threaten, didn't call anyone. I just stepped back, gave her room to walk past me like she owned the place, and listened to the faint echo of her heels fade down the driveway. Then I looked at that SUV again, sitting there in perfect stillness, engine ticking as it cooled, and for the first time, I smiled. Not because I was okay with it, but because she had no idea what she'd just handed me. I have worked with my hands long enough to know that ownership is not about what you say, it is about what you can prove when it matters, and that garage was the one place in my life nobody had ever questioned. My name is Ethan Cole, 38 years old, and for the last 15 years I have made a living fixing things other people gave up on, engines, transmissions, sometimes entire lives if you count the conversations that happen over an open hood at 6 in the morning. That garage was not just a place to park, it was where every paycheck turned into something real, where the smell of motor oil mixed with fresh coffee, where I could hear the quiet tick of cooling metal and know exactly what was working and what was not. I built the workbench myself out of reclaimed oak, measured twice, cut once, same way my old man taught me, and every tool on that wall had a story behind it. Every wrench earned, every socket placed exactly where my hand expected it to be without looking. So when I saw that Lexus sitting there like it belonged, it was not just inconvenience. It was a line crossed in a place that had never been crossed before. Linda had been circling that line for months, though. It started small, like it always does, comments about visibility from the street, suggestions that I should keep the garage door closed more often, subtle reminders about community standards delivered with that same polished smile. I remember one afternoon she stood at the end of my driveway, arms folded, eyes scanning the inside of my garage like she was inspecting a showroom she did not approve of. "You know, open garages can lower perceived value," she said, like she was doing me a favor, like I had asked for her opinion. I wiped my hands on a shop rag, looked at the engine block in front of me, and just nodded. I did not invite her in. I did not agree. I just let her talk until she ran out of words. That was the pattern. She pushed, I did not react. She assumed silence meant permission. Over the next few weeks, she got bolder, stepping a little closer each time, lingering a little longer, asking questions that were not really questions. "Do you ever consider renting out your space?" she asked once. eyes already measuring the square footage like it was already hers. I could hear the faint hum of her SUV idling at the curb that day, the low steady vibration that carried through the concrete under my boots, and something about that sound stuck with me. It was the same engine I was now staring at in my garage, the same presence that had been hovering at the edge of my property, waiting for a moment to step in. And I realized then, standing there in that quiet, that she had not just parked a car. She had tested a boundary. And more importantly, she thought she had already won. The next morning, the garage still smelled faintly like her perfume, mixed in with the usual scent of oil and metal, and it did not sit right with me. I woke up earlier than usual, before the sun had fully cleared the rooftops, the neighborhood still quiet except for the distant hum of sprinklers ticking on and off in perfect HOA-approved rhythm. Coffee in hand, I stood just inside the garage doorway and looked at that Lexus again, parked like a statement instead of a mistake. The engine was cold now, no ticking, no heat, just a silent presence sitting in the middle of something it did not belong to. I did not rush. I have never rushed anything that matters. I walked the perimeter slowly, boots echoing lightly against the concrete, eyes taking in every detail like I was inspecting a job. The tires were turned slightly to the left, careless, not centered. There was a faint smear of dust where the rear bumper had come too close to my tool chest. Small things, but they told me everything I needed to know. This was not temporary. This was assumption. Around 8:15, I heard it, the familiar click of heels on pavement, steady and confident, followed by the soft electronic chirp of a key fob unlocking doors. I stayed where I was, leaning against my workbench, arms crossed, watching as the garage door remained open and she stepped inside like she had done it 100 times before. "Morning," she said, cheerful, casual, already reaching for her door handle. I did not return the greeting. I just let the silence stretch again, the same way I had the day before, until she glanced up at me with a flicker of irritation she tried to hide. "You are going to want to move your vehicle," I said finally, voice calm, steady, like I was explaining something simple. She paused, one hand still on the handle, then straightened slightly, posture shifting into that familiar stance she used when she was about to lecture someone. "I told you, this is temporary," she replied, a little sharper this time, like my lack of reaction was starting to bother her. "The street is crowded, and this is an used space during the day." Unused. That word hung in the air heavier than anything else she had said. I set my coffee down slowly, the ceramic making a soft tap against the wood, and took one step forward, not aggressive, just enough to close the distance. "It is not unused," I said, looking directly at her now. "It is mine." For a second, something shifted in her expression, not fear, not even concern, just a brief recalculation, like she was adjusting numbers in her head. Then the smile came back, thinner this time. "Ethan, we all have to think about the bigger picture," she said, gesturing vaguely toward the street like she was speaking on behalf of something larger than both of us. "Community living means flexibility." I nodded once, slow again, letting her words settle, letting her believe they meant something here. Then I stepped back, giving her a clear path to leave, just like before. She hesitated for half a second, like she expected more, then got in her car, started the engine, and backed out without another word. The garage fell quiet again as the door rolled down behind her, that low mechanical hum filling the space for a few seconds before it stopped. I stood there in the silence, looking at the empty spot she had just left, and I knew two things with absolute certainty. She was going to do it again. And next time, I was not going to say a single word. She did it again 2 days later, and this time she did not even try to pretend it was temporary. I pulled into my driveway just after 5:30 in the evening, the sky still holding on to that warm orange glow that makes everything look calm even when it is not. And there it was, her Lexus already parked inside my garage like it had beaten me home. The engine was still running when I stepped out of my truck, that low steady hum vibrating through the concrete and into the soles of my boots, like a quiet claim staked in my absence. I could smell the exhaust mixing with the faint scent of cut grass drifting in from the neighboring yards, and it made the whole scene feel wrong in a way that was hard to explain, but impossible to ignore. I did not rush inside. I stood there for a second, keys in hand, watching the garage like I was looking at something that did not belong to me anymore. Then the driver's side door opened and she stepped out, smooth and unbothered, Closing it with a soft click like this was part of her daily routine. Timing worked out perfectly today, she said, adjusting her sunglasses even though the sun was already dipping behind the houses. I had a meeting run late. I nodded once, same as before, not giving her anything to push against. You are parked in my garage, I said, calm, steady, letting the words sit exactly where they needed to. She gave a small laugh, like I had made a joke she did not find very clever. Ethan, we have already been over this, she replied, walking past me toward the sidewalk like the conversation was already finished. There is no reason for that space to sit empty when it can be useful. Useful. The word echoed in my head the same way and used had the other morning. Each one carefully chosen, each one meant to reframe something that was not hers into something she could justify taking. I followed her with my eyes as she walked away, heels clicking against the pavement in that steady, confident rhythm, and I realized something else. She was not testing anymore. She had decided. The next few days confirmed it. Monday morning, her car was there before I even opened the garage. Wednesday afternoon, I came back from a parts run and found it parked deeper inside, closer to my workbench like she was getting comfortable. By Friday, she left it there for hours at a time, sometimes long enough that I would hear other neighbors slow down as they drove past, their curiosity hanging in the air like a question nobody wanted to ask out loud. I did not say a word. Not once. I watched. I listened. I noticed the pattern. She always parked between 9 and 10 in the morning, always left before dinner, always assumed the door would be opened because it always had been. That assumption became predictable, and predictable is something I understand. One evening, I stood inside the garage after she had left, the space finally empty again, and let the silence settle around me. The faint ticking of my own truck cooling down in the driveway, the distant sound of a lawn mower shutting off somewhere down the block, the soft hum of the overhead motor as I tested the door. Up, down, smooth, controlled, reliable. I looked at the wall-mounted control panel, the small indicator light glowing steady, and then at the remote in my hand. Simple system. One button to open, one button to close, one decision to make. I set the remote down on the workbench, right next to my coffee mug, and for the first time since this started, I stopped thinking about what she was doing and started thinking about when I was going to end it. By the following week, I was no longer reacting to what she was doing. I was studying it, the way you study a pattern in an engine when something feels off, but has not failed yet. Every morning had the same rhythm now, her Lexus rolling in between 9 and 10, tires crunching lightly over the driveway, the soft hydraulic sigh as she opened her door, the faint echo of her heels crossing into my garage, like it was an extension of her own home. I could set my watch by it. And that predictability, that confidence she carried like armor, told me everything I needed to know. She did not think there would be consequences. She thought this was already settled. One afternoon, I sat at my kitchen table with a legal pad in front of me, not because I needed to write anything down, but because it helped me slow my thinking, line by line, like I was diagnosing something mechanical. Property rights. Access. Obligation. I went through it all the same way I would trace a wiring diagram, methodical, deliberate. There was nothing in any agreement, no clause, no rule that gave her the right to that space. More importantly, there was nothing that required me to provide access once something was inside. That detail sat in my mind longer than the rest, heavy, solid, like a bolt finally seated exactly where it belonged. I leaned back in my chair and listened to the quiet hum of the refrigerator, the distant bark of a dog somewhere down the street, the normal sounds of a neighborhood that believed everything was in order. It almost made me smile. That evening, I walked out to the garage just before sunset, the air cooling off, carrying that faint scent of asphalt and dust that always settles in at the end of the day. I ran my hand along the edge of the workbench, feeling the smooth wood under my fingers, grounding myself in something that was mine, something real. The control panel on the wall blinked softly, that steady green light waiting for input, patient, neutral, like it did not care what decision I made. I picked up the remote from the bench, turning it over in my hand, feeling the worn edges, the slight give of the button under my thumb. Simple system. No drama. No argument. Just action. Over the next couple of days, I made small adjustments, nothing obvious, nothing she would notice. I checked the manual override, tested the timing, made sure everything worked exactly the way it should, smooth and quiet, No hesitation, no failure points. I even stood outside one morning after she parked, watching from a distance as she walked away without looking back, completely certain that everything would be exactly as she left it when she returned. That was the moment it clicked for me, clearer than anything else had so far. She trusted the routine more than she understood the risk. And routines, just like systems, can be interrupted. Friday morning came with that same steady sunlight spilling across the driveway, the neighborhood moving through its usual motions, nothing out of place on the surface. I heard her arrive right on schedule, the familiar sound of her engine cutting off, the door closing, her footsteps fading away. I waited. Not seconds. Not minutes. I gave it time, let the silence settle back in, let the moment become ordinary again. Then I walked into the garage, looked at her car sitting there like it always did now, and felt something settle in my chest. Not anger, not frustration, just certainty. I pressed the button. The motor hummed to life above me, smooth and controlled, and the door began to slide down inch by inch, sealing the space the same way it always had. Except this time, I was not planning on opening it again anytime soon. The door settled into place with a final, solid click that echoed just a little longer than usual, like the sound itself understood something had changed, and I stood there for a second with my hand still resting on the remote, listening to the silence that followed. No engine noise. No footsteps. Just the faint hum of the motor winding down and the quiet weight of a closed space that was not opening again anytime soon. I slid the remote into my pocket, grabbed my keys, and walked out without looking back, pulling the side door shut behind me with a calm, controlled motion that felt no different than any other day. The air outside was warm, late morning sun already heating the driveway, and somewhere down the street a lawnmower kicked on, steady and mechanical, like nothing out of the ordinary had just happened. I got in my truck, started the engine, and let it idle for a moment, hands resting on the wheel, eyes on the garage door in front of me. It looked the same as it always did. Clean, closed, neutral. The difference was invisible unless you knew what was inside. I backed out slowly, tires rolling over the concrete with that familiar low crunch, and pulled onto the street without hesitation. No announcement. No warning. Just absence. The first message came about 40 minutes later, right as I was merging onto the highway. The vibration of my phone buzzing lightly against the center console. I did not need to look at it to know who it was. I let it ring out, then settle into silence again. A few miles passed, then another notification, then another. By the time I hit the open stretch of road heading out of town, the pattern had already begun, short bursts at first, spaced out, controlled, like she was still trying to keep her composure. I imagined her standing in my driveway, pressing her key fob, hearing nothing. Walking up to the garage, maybe knocking once like that would do anything. Looking around to see if anyone was watching. The thought did not make me angry. It did not make me laugh. It just felt balanced. I drove for hours, the landscape slowly shifting from tight suburban streets to open stretches of highway, the sky widening overhead, the noise of the neighborhood fading into the steady rhythm of tires on asphalt. At a rest stop just past the state line, I finally picked up the phone, not to respond, just to look. 12 missed calls. 7 messages. The first one was still polite. Ethan, I need access to the garage. The second one had a little more edge. This is not acceptable. By the fourth, the tone had changed completely. You cannot keep my vehicle like this. I read them once, then locked the screen and set the phone face down on the passenger seat. The words did not matter. The situation did. And the situation was simple. Her car was inside my garage. My garage was closed. And I was not there. I got back on the road without replying, the engine settling into a steady hum as the miles stretched out in front of me. And for the first time since this started, everything felt exactly where it was supposed to be. By the second day, the messages stopped sounding controlled and started sounding urgent, and I could hear the shift even without listening to her voice. It was in the timing. The way they came in closer together now, no more long gaps between them, no more careful wording. I was sitting at a small diner off the highway, the kind of place where the coffee is always hot and the air smells like bacon grease and burnt toast, when my phone lit up. Again against the table. The vibration rattled lightly against the wood, a steady reminder that back home, something was unraveling. I took a slow sip of coffee before flipping the phone over, not rushing, not reacting. 15 missed calls now. New messages stacked on top of the old ones. This needs to be resolved immediately. You are creating a liability issue. I will have no choice but to escalate this. I read each one the same way I would read a set of instructions, calm, detached, looking for what actually mattered and ignoring everything else. There was no threat she could make that changed the basic fact of the situation. She had put her car in my garage. I had closed the door, and I was not there to open it. The law did not bend around frustration. It followed ownership. Outside, a semi-truck rolled past, the deep rumble shaking the windows for a second before fading back into the background, and I realized how quiet my head felt compared to the noise I knew she was dealing with. I pictured her again, pacing in my driveway, phone pressed tight to her ear, trying to pull authority into a situation where it did not apply. Maybe she called the HOA board. Maybe she tried to frame it as a community issue. I could almost hear her voice, controlled at first, then sharper when she realized nobody had the power to force a door open on private property without crossing a line they would not want to explain later. By the third day, the messages changed again. Fewer now, but heavier. Longer sentences. More careful wording. Ethan, we need to discuss access. This situation is becoming unreasonable. The tone had shifted from demand to negotiation, and that told me everything I needed to know. I left the diner, the bell above the door giving a soft chime as I stepped back into the afternoon heat, and got in my truck without replying. The seat was warm from the sun, the steering wheel almost too hot to touch for a second, grounding me back in the physical world while everything else played out miles away. As I drove, the road stretched out in long, straight lines, the kind that make time feel slower, more deliberate, and I let it stay that way. No rushing. No checking the phone every few minutes. Just distance. That night, in a quiet motel room with a humming air conditioner and thin walls that carried the muffled sound of a television next door, I finally listened to one of her voicemails. Her voice was tight, controlled, but the edges were cracking now. Ethan, this is not acceptable. You need to return and provide access to my vehicle. I let the message play out, then ended it without replaying it. The room fell back into that steady mechanical hum, and I set the phone down on the nightstand, screen facing down. She was used to control, used to systems bending around her expectations. But this was not a system she understood. This one did not care how loud she spoke or how many people she called. It only responded to one thing, and I was the only one holding it. By day 5, the silence from my end had done something no argument ever could. It had forced her to face the reality of the situation without anything to push against, and that is where people like Linda start to crack. I was parked at a scenic overlook somewhere off a 2-lane highway, engine off, windows down, the air carrying that dry, sun-baked smell of dirt and pine, when my phone buzzed again against the dashboard. This time it was not a string of messages. It was a single one. Longer. Careful. Ethan, I believe there has been a misunderstanding. I would like to resolve this situation amicably. I read it once, then leaned back in the seat, letting out a slow breath I had not realized I was holding. That word, misunderstanding, almost made me smile. There had never been any confusion. She knew exactly what she was doing when she parked in my space. The only difference now was that the outcome was no longer in her control. I did not respond. I never did. The days stretched out, one blending into the next, the routine of travel replacing the routine she had depended on back home. Gas stops, quiet meals, long drives with nothing but the steady hum of the engine and the occasional radio station fading in and out as I crossed county lines. And through all of it, my phone would light up every few hours, not constantly anymore, but consistently enough to remind me that the situation was still. Sitting there, waiting. By day 7, the messages shifted again, more formal now, almost rehearsed. We are prepared to discuss terms for access. Please advise on a time that works for you. Terms. Time. Words that implied negotiation, permission, acknowledgment that the control had changed hands. I pulled into a small motel that evening, the neon sign flickering faintly above the office, casting a soft red glow across the parking lot, and sat in the truck for a minute before going inside. The air conditioner hummed through the walls of the room when I stepped in, that steady mechanical sound filling the silence, and I set my keys down on the small table by the door, the metal clinking lightly against the surface. I picked up my phone again, scrolling back through the messages, reading them in order, watching the progression from confidence to urgency to negotiation laid out in a clean, undeniable line. It was almost clinical, like watching pressure build in a system that had nowhere to release. Somewhere back home, that Lexus was still sitting exactly where she had left it, surrounded by tools she did not understand, in a space she had assumed she could use without consequence. No movement, no access, just time doing its work. I set the phone down again and walked over to the window, pulling the curtain back just enough to look out at the empty parking lot. A few scattered cars, nothing moving, everything still. And it hit me then, not as a realization but as a confirmation of something I had already known from the start. This was never about the car. It was about control. And for the first time since she stepped into my garage like she owned it, that control was no longer hers. Day 14 started before sunrise, the kind of quiet morning where the air feels still and everything looks exactly the same as it always has, like nothing has changed even when everything has. I turned onto my street just after 6, the tires rolling slow over familiar pavement, the houses lined up in that perfect HOA symmetry, lawns trimmed, mailboxes aligned, everything controlled, everything predictable. My house sat right where I left it, garage door closed, no signs of disturbance, no tape, no damage, no forced anything, just a clean, quiet front like any other day. I parked in the driveway and shut off the engine, letting the silence settle around me, listening for something out of place, but there was nothing. No voices, no movement, just the faint hum of a distant sprinkler kicking on somewhere down the block. I stepped out, keys in hand, and walked toward the garage without rushing, each step measured, steady, the same way I had walked into this space 100 times before. The control panel by the side door blinked that same steady green light, unchanged, waiting. I opened the side door first and stepped inside, the air cooler than outside, carrying that familiar mix of oil, wood, and stillness that had always defined this space. And there it was, exactly where it had been. The Lexus sat in the center of the garage, untouched, a thin layer of dust settling along the edges of the hood, tires exactly where she had left them 2 weeks ago. No movement, no adjustment, just time, frozen around it. I stood there for a moment, taking it in, not with satisfaction, not with anger, just with clarity. Then I heard it, quick footsteps outside, sharper than before, less controlled. The side door opened behind me, and she stepped in, stopping just inside the threshold like she was unsure how far she was allowed to go now. Linda Whitmore did not look the same. Not undone, not dramatic, just smaller somehow, like the confidence she carried had been worn down by something she could not manage. "You are back," she said, her voice lower, more careful, like every word had to be measured now. I did not turn right away. I kept my eyes on the car for another second, then faced her, calm, steady, the same way I had been from the beginning. She held out a folder, both hands, like she was presenting something official, something important. "I have prepared a statement," she said, and there was no trace of that earlier tone, no authority, no assumption, just formality. "Acknowledging that I entered your property without permission and that access to this space is entirely at your discretion." I took the folder, flipped it open, read the page once, every line clear, every word exactly what it needed to be. No excuses, no conditions, just acknowledgment. I nodded once, closed the folder, and set it down on the workbench. Then I reached into my pocket, pulled out the remote, and pressed the button. The motor came to life above us, that same smooth hum filling the space as the door began to rise, light spilling in inch by inch, illuminating the car that had not moved in 14 days. Neither of us spoke while it opened. When it finished, the space felt different, lighter, like something had been reset. She walked past me slowly, got into her car without a word, and backed out into the driveway, the engine starting with that same familiar sound that had once felt out of place here. This time, it just sounded like something leaving. I watched as she pulled away, no hesitation, no glance back, just gone. Then I pressed the button again, the door sliding down, sealing the space once more, exactly the way it was meant to be. She walked in like she owned it. She left knowing she never did.